At the start of your chemistry course, I'd like to introduce you to some of the equipment. The first on our list is this test tube rack, and its obvious purpose is to hold test tubes. Sit them in here. We can make them out of wood, or we can have them made out of plastic. Our test tubes, again, we've got various sizes. We can have a thick test tube, or a thinner test tube, or a smaller test tube. There's a whole range of different test tubes. Beakers. Now, beakers are used to measure out roughly volumes of fluid, often water, and you get an idea of their size by what's on the front. This one here is a 100 millilitre beaker, and this one here is 150. We've got another one which is 250, and you can see a scale here down the side which enables you to get a rough idea as to how much liquid might go into that. There's also a little white square or rectangle here that you can actually use to write on using a pencil. If you use a pencil, it comes off quite easily and can be reused again. The next thing we're looking at is flasks, and we've got different sorts of flasks. The first is a conical flask. So these are conical flasks here. A small one, again, with something there that you can write on, and they're called conical because they're shaped like a cone, conical. The next series of items are the flasks here. This one here is called a round-bottomed flask for the obvious reason that it's got a round bottom. This is slightly different from a flat-bottomed flask. It gets its name because it's got a flat bottom. Another flask is the volumetric flask, and this flask is used for making dilutions. There is a small or very thin line here, and that conforms to a volume here of 250 millilitres. So it's used to accurately gauge volumes. The next thing is the various sorts of bottles. And we've got here a reagent bottle. So reagent bottles are simply used to hold chemicals. We've got a water bottle. Now you might say, why have a water bottle? Well, a water bottle like this is used usually to hold distilled water, okay, water which is pure water. And then we have what are called dropper bottles. So small amounts of liquid here, and you can squeeze these and release just one drop from the top of the bottle. Measuring cylinders are the next item on the agenda, and we've got here a 10 millilitre measuring cylinder, and this is a 50 millilitre measuring cylinder and a 100 millilitre measuring cylinder. And of course, we've got other larger ones still. And again, they're used for measuring the volumes very carefully of fluids. The next thing to have a look at is funnels. This is a filter funnel, and as you can see, it's made of plastic. Often enough you get them made of glass. You can get small ones, big ones, varying in size. After that, we've got a separating funnel. This is a separating funnel, and it is used, as the name implies, to separate liquid. So if we had, for example, some water and petrol, we added those to our separating flask. And what we can do is run out the one which has the higher density, which sits underneath here, and let's say the petrol up here is on top. And when the petrol comes down here, then we can turn this off and separate the water from the petrol. So that's our separating funnel. The next thing is stoppers. A simple introduction to this word. Okay, that's a stopper. We've got a stopper here. We've got different sorts of stoppers. For example, we could stop our volumetric flask and perhaps shake that a little, make sure our liquid doesn't escape. It's stopped from escaping. We could stop a test tube simply by putting this into our large test tube, for example. Then we've got a crucible with lid. Here is a crucible with lid. Now, crucibles are used to hold things or chemicals that we want to heat very, very strongly. So we put that in there and keep the lid on top to preserve any material which might come out of that and keep it inside the crucible. Next, we've got, after our crucible, we've got an evaporating dish. Now, the evaporating dish can be used underneath a Bunsen burner, and we might have, for example, some copper sulfate here or a salt solution, and we want to separate the water from the salt. Or we can do that gently heating that, and this would allow the water to evaporate. Hence, it is called an evaporating dish. Then we've got a watch glass. So it has its name from the old-fashioned watches, which used to have a round glass on top of them. And again, this is generally used for allowing material in that glass to evaporate. After that, we've got a petri dish. Here's a petri dish, very often used for in biology to allow different microscopic things to grow in it. Then we've got a filtered paper. So this is a filtered paper here. As you can see, it's round shape, and what you do is you fold that and fold again, and then you get your filter funnel, and you put that in here and you open it out. It looks like that. Sit that in there, and then put, let's say, a milky solution in here to run the liquid out and to leave the solid sitting on top of the filter paper. The next thing to have a look at is the heat mat. So this heat mat tends to preserve any bench or paint or whatever material that happens to be on our bench, so that we can sit hot objects on it. Very often we sit the Bunsen burner on that, even though the Bunsen burner doesn't normally get terribly hot, but that's what it's for. And then we have a gauze mat. So this is the gauze mat, and when you're using that, it's normally placed on top of this device here, otherwise known as a tripod stand, and we put our Bunsen burner underneath that. And when we light the Bunsen burner, what happens is that the heat is spread, and whatever you're putting on here, for example, a beaker or an evaporating dish, then the heat is spread out more evenly and it's not concentrated on a small point there. So that's our gauze mat. Then we have a tile. So this is a tile here. Often enough we can put little drops of chemicals on a tile and put perhaps another drop on there to see how the chemicals react. So that's the use of a tile. The tripod stand, which I've already mentioned, is here, and it's called a tripod stand, as you might imagine, because it has 3 feet pod. Okay. In English, for some reason or other, the word pod is associated with feet. So it's a 3-footed device. A clay triangle. This is a clay triangle, and obviously it's a triangle because it's got 3 sides. Again, that would sit on top of a tripod, and we'll probably use then a crucible and sit that there. And the clay triangle is used to, as I said, to hold that, and it means that we can put the full blast of the heat onto that crucible and not have to use something to hold it there. It's no use holding it in our hand. And you don't want to use that, our gauze mat like that, because that spreads the heat. So a clay triangle is used when we want a maximum amount of heat to heat some sort of substance in the crucible. Our next item, the Bunsen burner. Okay, this is our Bunsen burner here, and as you can see down the base here, it has ventilation for allowing the air to come through here. When you're using this, you have this open to ensure that the flame is blue. That's when you are heating things. When it's not in use but still sitting on your bench, you turn this, and what would happen is that you would produce a yellow flame, and that yellow flame is known as a safety flame. Reason being that the yellow is easy to see, and so you don't accidentally burn yourself. So our next item is a spirit burner. I don't have a spirit burner with me at the moment, but I hope that I will be able to show that to you some other way. And here it is. Matches. Okay, if you have to go to the front bench and get some matches, this is what we're talking about. Okay, and we all know how to light matches. A candle, as distinct from a match, this would be a candle. We can have candles in all sorts of shape, made of wax. It has a wick, and obviously there we can light up the wick and use that for various purposes. A taper. And our taper again is made out of wax like this, but it's long and thin. I don't have one at the moment. I hope that I might be able to get one and show that to you. And here it is. A wooden splint. Now you might light a wooden splint. It's a thin piece of wood, a little bit like a match, I suppose, but you can light that in a Bunsen burner, blow it out, and you find that it is glowing, and it would be called a glowing splint. There would be a little bright red there, and often enough that's used as the test for oxygen. You put that in a beaker or a test tube which you think might have oxygen in it, and if it does, you find that the glowing splint lights up again. So that's our test for oxygen. Tongs. These are tongs here. We would use tongs to hold something which we might put into a Bunsen flame. What you wouldn't use to hold something that you're going to put into a Bunsen flame would be this one here, which is a test tube holder, or well, you'd use this to hold test tubes. It's called a wooden peg, and the way in which it would work is something like this. So you might be heating that over a Bunsen burner. You wouldn't use a tongs for that because the grip is not very good, and you wouldn't use this directly in the flame like that. You do see from time to time these wooden pegs with burn marks here, so they've been used for the wrong purpose. The next thing to look at is spatulas. Now, spatulas come in various materials. This one here is a plastic spatula, and what you would use this for is to take chemicals out of, normally it's a powdered chemical. So this one here happens to be a liquid, but if we wanted, for example, some salt or some calcium carbonate, then we'd use the spatula. You can get metal spatulas. You can get metal spatulas. This one here clearly is metal, and again, this one can be put into a flame. Not all that a good idea, but you can do it, and to heat some chemicals to see what's going to happen to them. But obviously you don't put a plastic spatula into the flame. The next one is mortar and pestle. This is the mortar, this is the pestle. And these two are used to grind chemicals, to powder them. If we have large lumps, to break things up. Sometimes you might have some sand or something in here to help, for example, grind up leaves or some other chemical. The next is a retort stand. So we have various sorts of stands that we use. Let's begin with this one. So this is the retort stand from here down to here. Then we have the clamp. This is the clamp here. This thing that we use to hold the clamp is known as a boss head. It's a funny name. I didn't give it that name, but that's what it is. It's called a boss head. And all we need to do is turn these knobs here to hold things in place. So that's our retort stand. The next kind of stand is a ring clamp. So it's not actually a stand, it goes with a retort stand. So here, this is our ring clamp, and you can see, I hope, that we've got a ring. Okay, so this makes it a ring clamp. Now our last clamp is our burette clamp. So here you can see a device that we use to hold burettes, and to show you what a burette is, it's one of these, quite a long piece of glass, and we might use that to hold some reagent, for example, an acid or base, and allow our liquid to run into some other container. So that's our burettes. The next thing that we're looking at is a pipette. So we've got different forms of pipettes. This is one form, and this device here is referred to as a pipette filler. It helps us to draw whatever liquid we want up into the pipette. Another form of pipette is this one, and you may be able to see that it has graduations on that, so we can use that for delivering smaller volumes. Here again is another one. This one here we would call a bulb pipette. Other devices that we've got to look at, one is a thermometer. Now you probably know what we use a thermometer for. It's to measure temperature. We do have to be careful when we're using this in stirring it or using it as a stirrer. It's not a good idea because it's quite easy to break the bulb down the bottom there. The last few things that we want to have a look at, a stirring rod. Now this is a stirring rod here, and you can see that we've got a little bit of rubber there. Again, that rubber protects our test tube. Sometimes if we're stirring things, that stops the stirring rod going through the bottom of the test tube. The next item to look at is glass tubing, and we've got various ways in which we use this. One is to deliver material from one, perhaps a test tube, to somewhere else. So we call that delivery tubing. You can get straight tubing and use that for various reasons. Here's an example of straight tubing. And you can see, of course, we can get various sizes of that tubing. And we've got so this tubing can be made of various materials. This one, for example, is plastic. This one here is glass. We've got we can get rubber tubing. Now, rubber tubing, very often we use that with a Bunsen burner. So here you can see we've got the rubber tubing there. And the last couple of things to look at are an electronic balance. This is our electronic balance. It's not something that you carry around with you, and you should make sure that it's left flat. And what we do with that, of course, is to measure the mass of different chemicals. And finally, last but not least, we have a bottle brush. Now, this bottle brush is used to clean test tubes. So there we have it. So I hope that's a good introduction to you for the different bits of equipment that you'll find that you'll be using during the next couple